All right, so we're just going to take a quick second here while folks actually dial in. It takes a second, I think, for streaming to start. So while that's going on, Dragon, let's just do a quick mic check to make sure you're good.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, nice and clear. And Carolyn, we just did a quick check with you, so I think that was fine as well. All right, well, at this point, so we're into day 2, and one of the things that we wanted to get into is a bit of a discussion on where are we at with the course and what are some of the content elements. So we spent the first couple of days focusing on the infrastructure that we're going to use to learn for the next 9 weeks, and then now we want to dive into a little bit what do we have in terms of content. Now, I think a couple of things we just want to look at. We have a few things just to address content-wise regarding some questions with ProSolo. Carolyn, you believe would like to provide a quick update regarding Helper and the group discussions. I know you're heading out on a trip in the next day or so, so that might take a little bit of time for you to before you're back into internet space. So that's essentially what we want to do now, is dive into a few of the things related to the course, as well as some of the concepts related to the specific aspects of the tool set. So does that sound like a suitable agenda for the two of you?
Yep.
Okay, well, before we dive into the content, why don't we just start by a little bit, Carolyn, if you can talk about your quick helper and the group, give a quick update on the group tools, and then we'll start looking at the definitions that we've provided for learning analytics as well.
Okay, great. So I'm Carolyn Rose from Carnegie Mellon, and I think that most of you have been at least briefly introduced to some supportive tools that we have included in this MOOC. One of them is some synchronous chats that are attached to certain of the assignments so that you do some work individually, but you have a chance to talk to another student in the course about your about what you did, what you observed. You can share ideas. I believe that one of those sessions was scheduled for just a couple of hours ago, so some of you may have already participated in that. I wanted to point out some students have been confused about the button to click on to join those chats, because there's some instructions that have a picture of the button and it looks just like the button. So if you click and it doesn't respond and you think it's not working, it might be that you're actually clicking on the instructions. So that's just a heads up. The second thing is, some of you have already been making use of the Quick Helper. That's great. The Quick Helper, you can see if you scroll down to the bottom of pages in the edX environment, it says Quick Helper. And if you click to post to the Quick Helper, then not only do you start a thread in the discussion forum, but you also get matched with some potential helpers. And in order to make this work for you, you have to have pop-ups enabled in your browser. So I just want that to put that out there. Hopefully you were aware of that. So please go ahead and enable pop-ups before you use the Quick Helper. Somebody in their blog post did express worry that some students would be oversubscribed. The really highly skilled students would get matched too many times. So I wanted to assure you that actually part of our design was to do an optimization over the community so that a single smart student would be overly subscribed. We have some research papers regarding that. If you're interested, you can just send me email and I'll be happy to pass you some of that research that was underlying that design. The one other thing I want to point out, there's been some confusion also about the course agreement. Hopefully all of you, upon entering the course, took a look at the course agreement. That lets you know that we as an instructor team are interested in doing research towards making better opportunities for online learning, and because of that, we want to be able to use the data that we gather about your participation in this course to give us more insight into how we can offer better experiences in the future. So the agreement is about whether you're willing for the data from your participation to be part of that research. Now, some students were worried that they were locked out of the course if they accidentally filled it in improperly. That's not true. Nobody is locked out of the course, but we would really like you to go ahead and read that and decide whether you're willing to let us benefit from learning from watching your participation. We would greatly appreciate that. So I think those were all of the things, and I think I'll pass it back to George now. George?
Okay, great. So thanks for that overview and that introduction. What we're going to do now is just ask Dragon just provides a quick overview of a few things that relate to Pro Solo. Things have stabilized there. There's a bit of activity early on, and so over the next several days we'll provide some short tutorials and guidance on how to build your profile and the role that that has, especially with the daily email newsletter where we're starting to build your blog profile and share with others what you're doing. So Dragon, you had a couple quick updates.
Okay, it's very exciting to see some people are hanging out in Pro Solo and seeing some of the activities. I even today started seeing some requests for assessments of some students, competencies and credentials that they already completed in Pro Solo. I would like to point out to everybody that in this course we have a peer assessment, and in this case, please do request from your peers assessment of your credentials when they are being submitted there, not from the instructors. The other important thing is do not please submit your credentials for any assessment without producing some of your own artifacts or some of the evidence based on which you can prove that you mastered certain of these competencies. So for example, in one of these two credentials that we released this week is called, I think, Introduction into Learning Analytics, and one of these competencies is having very extensive assignment. So please do proceed with the completion of that assignment, generate a report, generate some artifacts, that upload those artifacts into Pro Solo, or blog about those artifacts, and then again upload or link them to Pro Solo as part of the so to say portfolio associated with your credentials, and then send it for evaluation to some of your peers. Your peers then will receive notifications inside of Pro Solo, and you'll be able to proceed with that. That's the first thing important to mention with respect to Pro Solo. There's another issue related to Pro Solo is some users wanted to use their Facebook logins to log in into Pro Solo. For Pro Solo, for the sake of this course, we fully depend on identity management by edX. So the thing is that edX is fully managing that process. At this point, when they are prompting that signing page, they do not allow you to enter your Facebook credentials. That's quite unfortunate at this stage. We are trying to work with edX to fix that. However, at this point, we only can allow for entering and logging into Pro Solo by using your edX credentials. We could potentially allow you to enter your Facebook credentials into Pro Solo, but that would then mean that you are completely disconnected from edX, given that edX is our identity provider. Hopefully that's not too confusing, even for us to communicate to each other. It was a bit confusing. So I do apologize that we are encountering this type of a problem, but it's a big learning experience for both edX and us in Pro Solo, and we really appreciate your attention and much of your patience that you showed when you are dealing with us and with this whole course. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dragon. Ryan, we're fortunate to have you joining us. I think you're in China. Do you want to try and do a quick hello before we start talking about the definition of learning analytics and the kinds of things people do when they do learning analytics work?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good to see you in Wuhan, China. It's 5:40 in the morning, and I'm excited to be here. Good to have you on the class.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Ryan. You broke up a little bit, but I think I got that you're up way too early in the morning. And the one thing I found from visits to China is that periodically, depending on where you're located, it's really tough to get that first cup of coffee. It seems like tea's a little bit easier to come by. But anyway, I hope you enjoy the trip there. All right, so now that we've spent a little bit of time in this course trying to get you comfortable with the architecture of the course, I know for some of you it has been an interesting process, getting comfortable with what the details are and how things work. And now why you're here, though, is not to have people introduce you to how to participate in a digital web. And I think most of you are here to try and figure out what are learning analytics and what can we do with learning analytics. And actually, we're fortunate with a group here that Carolyn Rose is, I guess, is it incoming president for the International Society for Learning Sciences, or current president? Sorry, I'll let you define, Carolyn.
I'm president-elect, so my term as president will start this summer. the way we do it in ISLS is that you serve for 3 terms, president-elect, president, and then past president. I mean 3 years, not 3 terms. Anyway, that's more than you wanted to know.
Okay, great, thanks. And then we have Dragan Gasevich, who is the president-elect for the Society for Learning Analytics Research, and we have Ryan Baker, who is the founding president for the International Educational Data Mining Society. And so everybody here has some interest in what are analytics and the kinds of things that people do when they're engaged in the analytics process. So in the course we defined, and I'll ask each of you to respond to this or how you would revise this or what this caches out like more practically. But we define learning analytics quite broadly, where we say it's the process where we're measuring, we're collecting data about learners and their experience and their context so that we can improve the teaching and learning process. Now, it's a clunky definition, but what we're trying to get at is that when an individual, an academic, it could be an analyst, it could even be a student, or it could be an administrator, but when they're working with data that's been generated through the learning process and their intention is to improve teaching and learning practices, that's learning analytics. So how about I start with you, Carolyn, and then Dragan and Ryan, each of you to respond to, does that definition capture what you think learning analytics is or the kinds of things you engage in when you're involved in work?
So I think that's one way of looking at it. I guess as I have reflected on what it is that makes learning analytics distinct from any other kind of data mining, I think that at the level of what we actually do, the important thing is about how we represent the data that we're working with, that we need to be able to represent it in such a way that we're preserving what it is from that data that's going to tell us something meaningful about the learning process and the learning relevant experiences of the learners. So, for example, you can imagine that and as is the case in my research, that you can learn something about how students learn in MOOCs by looking at their participation in the discussions. But you could use that data also to learn things about, you know, just how people behave socially in general, or what are markers of particular demographic groups. And even though it's data that was collected in a learning setting, you might not be asking those kind of questions. Now, I know that in your definition you said something about the ultimate application, but I think that if you looked at the kind of representations of that conversational data that lend themselves to questions about you know, demographic groups or questions about social processes in general, you would try to capture different things about what was happening in that discussion than if what you are trying to find out is things about how people are learning through those discussions. So I think that in working with the data, that you will end up doing different things at a detailed level when you're doing learning analytics than just data mining in general, even if the data itself was the same data, just because you're asking different kinds of questions.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Dragan, I'd like to hear your thoughts or your responses to the clunky definition of learning analytics we've provided learners in week 1.
Well, that's a really...
I think you're still muted.
That's a great point by some of the students. I mean, probably many of you are very well aware that learning analytics is a really new field, right? And so the Society for Learning Analytics Research came up with this definition.
George, I'm sorry, could you mute your mic because I'm hearing myself?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because George and I are just sitting across each other, and George has his mic as well on, and I'm hearing myself. So it's becoming very difficult. So anyways, so the definition of it was something that we came up with about 4 years ago. It's been a lot of research in the last several years. We came up with a lot of understanding with respect to learning analytics, and I think we are now maturing as a field, and we definitely need to have a better definition. One thing that I would encourage students to do in this course is to try to blog and to come up with their own definitions and understanding of the field of learning analytics. That will be a really important exercise. I think even for us in the Society for Learning Analytics will be a great feedback to see what other people see as the definition of learning analytics. For me, learning analytics is really something which helps us to understand and consequently optimize learning. Learning analytics is a natural extension of existing things that we are doing in education and learning sciences, and it provides us with the opportunities to use additional types of data. In the past, we've been always using data in educational research, but also in educational practice, which are, for example, at the end of semester questionnaires. Now we don't have to wait that. We can get data about students as learning unfolds. So we can then provide learners with real-time feedback about their learning activities, about their learning quality, etc. But in many cases, many individuals are associating learning analytics as strictly something which is to predict student success or to predict how many students will fail or not. That's an important topic, but that's not the only thing that learning analytics is about. Learning analytics is also to describe learning, to see what is happening, and then to provide personalized learning experience for every individual. So this is my quick take on learning analytics. George, over to you.
Thanks. I feel like we're like on a CB, breaker. Anyway, Ryan, this is you were out of the gate early on this. In fact, you were doing work with educational data mining for probably about 3 or 4 years before Solar came along in 2011. And you've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think you've written one of the definitive articles on what exactly happens in the process of educational data mining. So how would your definition of analytics differ from what we've been talking about?
Well, that's a good question. I think that everything everybody has said is stuff I agree with. I think the issue that Carolyn raised, for example, of how we transform the data and make it meaningful is a really interesting one, and I think that's different in education than in other domains of e-science. For example, I think that there's a lot of meaningful hierarchy and organization in educational data. I think that ultimately the goal of learning analytics and educational data mining is to figure out what we can learn about learners, about learning, and about the settings they're learning in to try to make it better. And I think that when learning analytics came onto the scene, it came onto the scene in large part because there were key things that EDM wasn't yet doing. I think that the themes of automated response to students and the themes of data mining supported science were there, but I think that the theme of including stakeholders and communicating our findings to learners and to instructors and to other people who need that wasn't there. So I think that there's a lot here. It's hard to capture it in one definition because there's lots of new data. It's coming in at a scale we didn't have before. We have new methods to handle it. And once we have learned something from that data, we've got to provide actionable information to online learning systems, to researchers, and to instructors and other stakeholders. So I think there's a lot of stuff to do here, and I think we're going to have fun stuff to work on for the next several decades.
Great, thanks for that summary, Ryan, and I agree. There's a context that's different, and that's producing this growing interest in data, and that's having a substantial impact on how we ask, well, how we answer questions, really, educationally. How do we serve students timely and appropriate help when it's needed? How do we provide guidance to students that are perhaps not making it through the course pathway in an optimal type of an approach? But there's also a range of questions that arise, and these are certainly around privacy and ethics and the use of data that students may not be aware that are being used and that we're using from a research end or even just from a teaching and learning practice end. So there's a range of outstanding questions that exist. Now, last thing, we've got about 10 minutes left here. So last thing I'd like to look at briefly is what is it that people do when they do learning analytics? And probably the easiest way to handle this is in the sequence of the course. So, Dragan, I'll ask you, and then Ryan, then Carolyn, talk about what are the things that you're going to be talking about or looking at in this course in terms of topics. And I'll just provide a quick overview. So this week has been Get Yourself Orientated week. There's an assignment around evaluating the Learning Analytics Tool Matrix. You get a chance to start thinking about what kinds of tools are available, what's the functionality of those tools, what do they do, what are the unique attributes of them, and then share that back to the community either in terms of a blog or post or into the edX discussion forums if you like. So that's what we're doing this week. Toward the end of the week, you download Tableau. Once you've downloaded Tableau, you can start playing around a little bit, but next week we turn our attention to using Tableau. And so the bulk of the activity that we do next week is working with Tableau. Now, Tableau is really not the big issue. The big issue is learning how to work with data and how to start understanding what data looks like, what kind of things you can do with data, how you can analyze it, how you can gain insight from it, how you can share it, how you can create dashboards. So we intentionally chose Tableau because it was a good tool to get started with. As I think Carolyn mentioned, one of our sessions is PowerPoint on steroids, basically, or glorified version, or not PowerPoint, of Excel. And I think at some level, that's one of the appeals of it, that Tableau is a tool that someone can pick up and start working with and actually do some impressive things quite quickly. But the bigger issue isn't the tool. The bigger issue we're going to look at in week 2 is the idea of working with data and getting started with data. We'll spend a little bit of time in week 2 also. One of the sessions, you'll look at the institutional impact of data and analytics. So with that, Dragon, I'll turn over to you. What are you going to talk about in the 2 weeks of the course that you're addressing?
In the 2 weeks that I'm addressing, I'm going to talk about social network analysis. Social network analysis is one of these themes that's been probably most popular in the field of learning analytics, at least according to the proceedings and the papers that we had at the International Conference on Learning Analytics and Knowledge and in the Journal of Learning Analytics. Those are 2 new publications. I think that's quite natural because the general social learning and the importance of the social interactions and social context is widely acknowledged and recognized in education. There are many numerous different types of benefits on cognitive processing, on information internalization, on development of critical thinking skills, on student retention, etc., etc. But what makes it social network analysis quite appealing is that it's a mature field. There are many available mature tools, and you can quickly get access to some of those tools. As one of these activities that you will be engaging into will enable you to easily download all your Facebook connections to create your own social network, and so that you can easily visualize and analyze it, so that you can see whether you are central inside of your social network and who are the central individuals inside of your social network, regardless of whether we are going to deal with a course or not. The other thing that section of the course will help you to make some sense out of the probably mess that we currently have in social media happening around this even course. So we are going to offer you a data set which we collected from different social media, so that you can then import those data into the tools that we will be providing for social network analysis, and then you can also see what are the types of forces that are happening and driving discussions and conversations inside of the courses that are distributed like this one. Hopefully that will also help you, but also us as instructors, to guide us through the process of this entire course, and we have all quite successful joint journey. So looking forward to working with you on these topics. George, over to you.
Great. Actually, over to Ryan.
Well, that was fast. In the 2 weeks I'll be talking about, I'll talk about one of what I think is one of the core methods also in educational data mining and learning analytics, which is prediction modeling. Prediction modeling is one of the ways that you can make inferences about something that you don't currently know. And sometimes that's making predictions about the future. Sometimes it's making predictions about the present. But basically, it's trying to identify something that you don't have data about in new data. The way we do that is we collect some data that's labeled training data to build a model, and then build a model and validate it so that it can work in new contexts when we don't know the answer. So in the first week, we'll learn to conduct prediction modeling effectively and appropriately. Obviously, can't cover the full topic, but get an introduction to it, and understand some of the core uses of it in education. There will be an online activity where you'll learn to use the RapidMiner tool, which is one of my favorite tools for doing this. In the second week, we'll talk about how to validate and evaluate the models, an introduction to that, some key diagnostic metrics and what they're good and bad at, and the specific case of behavior detection, which is a popular use of learning analytics to try to make inferences about student behavior in real time, replicating human judgment. Human beings can recognize if a student is gaming the system or off task, and we'll be looking at how we can engineer data to be able to make similar predictions without a human being in the loop. So I look forward to working with you on this and to learning together.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And Carolyn, over to you. What are you going to be addressing in your weeks in the course?
Okay, my 2 weeks of the course really build very nicely on Ryan's 2 weeks. I'll be talking about a specific form of predictive modeling called text mining, where we take the same kinds of algorithms that are used for the behavior detection sort of work that Ryan does, but apply them to textual data. And in particular, I'm interested in discussion data, and so there will be a big focus on analysis of discussion and the role that that can play in research in online learning. And there will be a couple of research highlights where we'll actually talk about work in the field of learning sciences where text mining is being used, both for supporting research and understanding the experiences of learners, but also for triggering just-in-time interventions to support learning through discussion. But we'll learn how to use a tool called LightSide. It's an open-source, freely downloadable toolkit for text mining that includes some tools for being able to do the feature engineering aspect of text mining, where you take the raw text and you represent it in ways that allow you to find meaningful patterns, and then use machine learning to do the predictive modeling. LightSide has support for the whole process of doing text mining. In the short 2 weeks that we'll have together, we won't be able to get through all of the functionality that it offers, but we'll step through as much as can really be done in 2 weeks, and with lots of pointers to next steps that you might be able to take. And LightSide comes with some data sets that you'll be able to play with. A running theme throughout the data-oriented exercises will be measurement of attitude through text. And we'll talk about how you can look at that in the context of discussion forums and also other kinds of textual data.
Great. Well, thanks very much, again, Carolyn, for that overview. So a final 2 minutes that we have left. One of the questions I've seen come up in the forum several times and might be worth briefly raising here is, do you have to be a statistician? Do you have to be a computer programmer? Do you have to be a math whiz? What are your prerequisites for the sections that you're looking at? As I mentioned earlier with Tableau, the prerequisites are fairly low. It's a tool that enables you to start doing basic work with data and visualizing data in a way that you'll impress yourself with after you've done a few little activities with it. But as you're going through your sections, how complex is it going to be for an individual that has perhaps very limited experience in data science or data mining or analytics in general?
Yeah, I can talk about the section that I'm responsible for. Social network analysis doesn't really require any sophisticated knowledge of statistics at all. All you need to do is basically to be familiar with some of the social interactions. I think we are all familiar with social interactions. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in terms of the tools, you will be introduced into Gephi, but that Gephi is really a tool as usable as you will find that Tableau is usable. Therefore, nothing sophisticated there that you need to have any prior knowledge about that. The concept of social networks is also, I think, very intuitive. Basically, any link you are talking to somebody else is creating a relation between two individuals, and we are representing those as graphs and nodes. So from that perspective, you don't have to have much of prior knowledge at all. And we are also providing data sets. Of course, for those who know a bit more and have some deeper background knowledge, they can, for example, create on their data sets by using programming, but you don't have to do that at all. We'll have already pre-processed and prepared data sets for you. Also, for some of you who have very sophisticated knowledge of statistics, you will be able to analyze some of these data with the stats you love to do. In this course, you don't have to do. We'll also provide you opportunity to connect even knowledge that you will gain in the first sessions with Tableau so that you visualize some of these social networks analysis in Tableau. Therefore, the assumption about social network analysis that you are coming without any prior knowledge about social network analysis, statistics, or computer programming. It's really intended to facilitate very wide scope of learners so that they can come without much technical skills, yet opportunities for those who know more and who would like to learn much more.
Great, thanks. Ryan, how technical do you need to be with your week?
Similar situation to Dragon. If you have a background in stats or computer science, you will be able to do some things beyond the scope of these 2 weeks, but these 2 weeks are designed to be accessible to people who don't have a background in stats, don't have a background in data mining. RapidMiner is a good tool. It's relatively easy to use. It's pretty powerful for a tool that's that easy to use. You can't do everything in it, but you can do a lot of things in it without programming. So even if you don't have a background in programming or stats, I'd encourage you to try out my 2 weeks. I think you'll get a lot out of it.
And Carolyn, take it home.
Yeah, so I guess what I'd like to say is I think it's the same for my unit, what others have said. Certainly no requirement of any deep knowledge of stats. But what I'd like to say is I'd like you to encourage you to think of stats as your friend. I think that, a lot of people in college, they either loved stats or they hated stats, and if they hated stats, then they just don't want to have anything to do with it. But this might be the course that actually convinces you that stats can be really cool, it can be really fun, and I encourage you to reach out to your fellow students, and if there are things that you feel like maybe you don't quite understand the foundation for, if only you kind of understood a little bit more about that stats, strike up that conversation and start to follow up on some of the follow-up readings. And honestly, I don't believe in mental blocks or whatever. You're all capable of learning a little bit more, and this is your opportunity to stretch yourself. So don't put yourself down, don't sell yourself short, dive in, have the fun. And in my unit, what I've tried to do is really sprinkle pointers to ways that you can get deeper into the content if you want to. And so you can definitely do everything that's a standard part of my 2-week unit with no prior knowledge of stats. But I have included pointers to books that you might read that I think are excellent in terms of taking a couple of steps beyond. And so, yeah, I just encourage you, dive in and have confidence in yourself. You can do it.
Great. So what I would suggest that you do, especially if you're a little stats shy, is take Carolyn's assessment of stats and put it on your phone as a ringtone, just to motivate you to put that extra effort in during the stats week. Anyway, thanks very much for your time. For those of you that are listening in, obviously dive into the content in edX. We're going to keep monitoring the forums, engaging. Ryan, great to see you join us from China. Have a good week. I should mention 2 things about next week. We have Tony Hurst that's going to be dialing in. Tony is probably one of the most impressive data folks I know, in that he's kind of the MacGyver of data. If you're familiar with MacGyver, the good old program, he's the kind of guy that could take duct tape and build a space shuttle out of it when it comes to data. So he's going to join us just to give us some just really practical kind of ways that you can do neat stuff with not an overwhelmingly complex amount of tools. We're going to have our regular instructor session later on the week as well. We'll post those things, and we hope within the next little while to post the sessions that we have for the entire duration of the course. Thanks very much. Enjoy the evening or morning or wherever you're dialing in from.